Three. Good afternoon, everyone. I am joined by, I'm Tom Munns, and I'm joined by Ron Nielsen. He's the author of the tremendous resource, 20 years in the making, the history of federal lands in the United States, available at thehistoryofFederalLandsInTheUnitedStates.com. I would encourage you to buy the book, so would Ron, and follow us along on these videos. These videos are not meant to replace the book. They're meant to go along with the book. So the idea is you buy the book and then you study along with us on the videos. If you have any questions, feel free to drop comments in the video box at one of the locations. We have them posted on YouTube, Rumble, and we also have them available on Spotify. And before I go any farther this time, hey Ron, how's it going?
Going pretty good, Tom. I went ahead and upgraded my location. I'm in the beautiful Stites, Idaho, by the ocean. So I thought everybody would like to see the inland sea.
Well, those waves are something I'm very passionate about, man. So I'm all
You
about
like
it.
those?
I do love that. Yeah, and you got a new mic now. It's you're just
Got a
rocking and
new
rolling.
mic. I should have a better sound.
It's
I'm
so
just
good.
clipping right along here.
Yeah, it's very good. All right, so before we go on, this today we are going to start. We haven't done a book video in a while because we deviated. I'll go ahead and talk about that in a minute. But we are into chapter 7, page 57 of the book, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But as usual, I give a bit of an update on where we were so that people can connect one video with the other. So we ended up doing completing book video 15, pages 54 to 57 roughly. We were talking about things like admiralty, exclusive jurisdiction. We were talking about the two positions of exercise within the states, which was interesting. Let's see, we talked about a little bit about Warren v. Clark. We talked about we talked about Noah a little bit, uh, and the Nez Perce Forest. We talked a little bit about Civil War and Gilman versus Philadelphia, a military problem, the Confederacy, and pre-civil and post-Civil War. We then followed up with the Act of 1871. This was a fun one for me because it was something that the Patriot community has really kind of adhered to, right? And people had thought of this as truth, and we wanted to be able to sort of dispel what we thought might not be so accurate and offer evidence that very few people have ever done. And we got into the details of the thing and so far. So if you haven't watched the Act of 1871 video, I would encourage you to do that. Then, because of some responses that we got, we ended up doing a follow-up with the Act of 1871 video. I think I called it the sequel appropriately. And we ended up discussing things of more of a philosophical nature, if I remember right. And then relating it back to the Act of 1871 later on in the video. So please feel free to watch both of those. Please share those. It's imperative that you do. And so today, Ron,
Sir.
you are going to take us you're going to take us through. We're going to start through chapter 7, and I'm going to let you run with it, and then I'm going to go ahead and interject if you would allow me to do so from time to time to see if we can
Sure. Please do.
address any questions that people might have along the way. So take it away, my
Absolutely.
friend.
And before we go too much further here, I want to give a shout out to Michael Law. He's been following our series and commenting. He's brilliant comments. The guy's obviously a thinker and a reader, and so his comments have been great for me to be able to interface with him back and forth through some questions and answers. I've invited him to do a panel with us. He's agreed. But I want to give a shout out to him because I used his question as sort of a springboard. But he commented afterward, and I told him I would make sure that this got posted. His comment was not intended to support civil war, but I think he's coming from the same vein that Tom and I are, and that's we hear this around being spread around the political communities in the state of Idaho. And it's just hard to go about your daily business and not know that this is being talked about, right? So that I think that was his intent. That's what he expressed to me. So I want to make sure I wanted to clear that up
Can we give him a bit
for
of a
him. And
plug
then,
since you already did it?
well, why don't you
So
plug him? You probably know more about him than I do.
I do. Michael's a good, he's a good man, man. He's a speaker, he's a Fox radio network contributor. He's also the author of his own book, imagine that, of The Founders Revolution. It's available at michaellawauthor.com, michaellawauthor.com. If you're interested in understanding a little bit more about the founders, our Constitution, history, and the principles of the Declaration of Independence, go to michaellawauthor.com. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it'll be a pleasure to have him in a roundtable and talk about some of these real weighty issues. So I hope everybody stays tuned for that. It's going to be great. We also talked in Idaho on Fire about starting to schedule some interviews with people who have been abused by the administrative state. Now, I want to make sure something is clear. We do not want to take a position against the administrative state. What we want to do is we want to take, cases, controversies between citizens who have clearly been abused by the system, and we would love to be able to give an opportunity for the administrative state to respond in an interview, right?
Amen.
So we're
Amen.
going to reach out to certain people and we want to hear both sides of the story. But the problem that I ran into in a conversation on Auto on Fire is that only the high profile cases are ever known. And there are a lot of people who have run afoul of the administrative state and have gotten taken to the cleaners, imprisoned, worse, buried. So there's just a lot of, we need to talk this thing through before we end up in a civil war. That's just where things are at, and I think everybody understands that. So I know that Tom and I have talked about this extensively, and this is what we would like to see happen. If we're unable to talk things out so that we don't have to kill each other, that'd be great. This is our effort to do that. And if it's just things, if the federal government is going to take the position that there's nothing to talk about, then it is what it is. Then it is what it is. There's nothing that can be done. But
I'd
we're going
like
to
to
try
interject
until,
too, for sure.
yeah,
For sure. And I think in an effort so that people are up to speed on this, because I think you and I had talked about this a little bit before, and I could be a little bit off because I don't know that we'd openly verbally agreed, but I think that what's something that's really important to me is to find the truth. I always tell people, look, I'm looking for the truth wherever it is. If it ends up with egg
yeah,
on my face or it ends up with egg on somebody else's face, it doesn't matter. This is not about whether you're a
yeah,
friend of mine or whether you're not a friend of mine. I'm not going to protect you or I'm not going to defend you if your position is inaccurate. I think these are
yeah.
very appropriate times actually to strengthen relationships when you have opposition on something with the ultimate goal to find the truth. Therefore, what I would also like to add is that if you are interested in being interviewed, that we end up getting some sort of statement from you or something that you are telling the truth. We are not interested in promoting things that are not true. And so we want a commitment from
That's right.
you, at least I do, right? We want a commitment from
I
you
do
so
too.
that other people can't say that we're spreading malicious propaganda because I don't ever want to be guilty of that. The other thing too is if you are going to be on video, Ron and I would very, very much like to be able to have a strong adult dialogue. And what I mean by that is somebody that is willing to be challenged about maybe if we find out, for example, that you have been abused by the administrative state. I would like to know, well, was he lawfully abused by the administrative state or unlawfully abused by the administrative state? Were there things that he could have done better or differently? Or did he not understand certain parameters about the type of jurisdiction that he was swimming in or whatever? So in other words, this is going to be a no holes barred, honest search for truth as we start deconstructing what is actually going on to help people become more ed on this topic. Go ahead.
I'm in a complete
Right?
agreement with Tom on this. I think
Okay.
I'm after the truth more than anything else. I look, there's probably going to be people that have not done things legally and have how would we say it, unnecessarily aggravated the administrative state. And then now that doesn't mean that that's a free pass to the administrative state, because I'm going to tell you what's going to happen here. All right, I'm going to compare everything that we do here to the law, to the letter of the law. We're supposed to be a nation of laws in which everybody is underneath that law. That's the citizen and the administrative state. So in this investigation, whoever it is that's sitting here and doing the interview, if it becomes apparent that the law wasn't being obeyed by you, it's going to look that way in these interviews. Okay, so that's a heads up to anybody that just in case, because I'm not going to pull any punches. I'm going to compare it to the law. Whatever the law says, that's the end of it.
I
Right
think that's
now,
why I'm kind of
I may
connected to
love you
you.
as a person. I may
Right.
love you as a person, and that's why Tom and I are going to vet these ahead of time, because if it's going to make you look bad, you might not want to do it. Okay, so
Mhm.
that's the deal.
But but you also have to remember that the actions that you believe that you have suffered need to be flushed out in order for us to find solutions. People that are not
That's right.
heard need to be heard. But if you've got issues
That's
and
right.
they are legit, then people need to understand what they are. And we're hoping that this is a
Yep.
mechanism to make that happen.
Agreed.
Okay, brother. You ready to get into it?
Okay, so I'm going to do a screen share. We'll get right into the book and chapter 7 of the book. This is when the military industrial complex begins. Chapter 7. Um, the William McKinley area is very interesting. Um, Theodore Roosevelt won the presidency in a very heated campaign. And you have to understand that William McKinley and Theodore Roosevelt were really two different guys. Theodore Roosevelt was 100% a military dude. In fact, it can be said that Theodore Roosevelt and his military fellowship, for lack of a better way of saying it, were driving forces behind the creation of the military industrial complex because of this era right here. Now, so William McKinley, he's president in 1890. He's president of the United States. And we have this issue going on with Spain that just suddenly emerges out of nowhere. And we had an issue with one of our ships that were docked. Where was it docked at? Um, I see. I get into Corp USA a little bit here too, but we've already covered that. We might have to touch on it a little bit initially. Anyway, um, so before McKinley's assassination, or right thereabouts. So we're talking about 1901. Well, that's an interesting date because 1901 is also the date of the Bidwell decision. And then I think it was the year before where we had and I forget, I think it was the mantra was to hell with Spain, up with the Maine, or something like that. So it was a ship called the Maine, and it had been attacked supposedly by Spain, and a whole bunch of sailors had lost their lives and had been sunk. And so then this American war cry started, you know, and that was sort of the impetus. And you got Enrique Dupuy de Lome of Spain, somehow fell into the hands of Cuban rebels, through back channels, exploited Cubans in America. So you had a Cuban connection in America. Um, and of course it says, like I have here, we're able to direct this letter to the U.S. Secretary of State William R. Day, and the letter spread like wildfire throughout the entire U.S. media. The contents of the letter amounted to insults against McKinley, with the New York Journal stating that these to be the worst insults to the United States in its history. The contents of the letter were, in part, It shows once more that McKinley is weak and catering to the rabble. And besides, now the rabble, that's you guys. You guys are the rabble. Tom, you're the rabble. Let's get it
Nice.
cleared up here. And besides, a low politician who desires to leave a door open to himself and to stand well with the jingos of his party. So, a lot of stuff being hurled about during this time frame against McKinley. Now,
Can
McKinley
we
gets assassinated by. Go ahead.
go ahead? No, you went back. That's good. Keep going.
Yeah, so Leon's, and I don't know how to say his name very well, is Salgaz. Leon Salgaz um, was the person who assassinated McKinley. And, they were at a function, and the dude just walks up and puts one in his chest. And they take him to the ground and all this, and they haul McKinley off, and he dies. Well, I don't know if anybody knows this, but prior to McKinley's death, um, the president of the United States had been assassinated. And what happened is the president of the United States got assassinated. Teddy Roosevelt was in line, won the vice presidency, because there was a lot of, and the problem that McKinley had with Teddy Roosevelt all was over the sinking of the Maine, because Teddy Roosevelt was sort of involved in the escalation of that without going through his commander. And it irked the commander in chief that he didn't go through proper channels to get this done. So there was a little bit of a beef there.
Ron?
So the vice president gets assassinated. Roosevelt gets that position, and then the president gets assassinated, and Teddy Roosevelt wins the presidency without having to campaign for it.
Can I ask you a question?
Now, what are the odds? Go ahead.
Since we look at a lot of these ships that sort of mysteriously sank,
Right?
and we know for sure that there's conspiracies behind almost every one of them. Uh, was there anything that we should know about the Maine, as far as some sort of conspiratorial elements, like some of the other ones, like the Lusitania stuff like that,
Yeah,
or the Liberty or whatever it was?
it was. Yeah, so I'm just going to read what I have written here in the book because it's pretty explanative. On February 25th, Theodore Roosevelt, Assistant Secretary of the Navy, sent an order to Commander George Dewey, commander of the U.S. Navy's Asiatic Squadron in Hong Kong, to be prepared to attack the Spanish fleet in the Philippines if there was an outbreak of war. Significantly, the command was not given by John Davis Long, Secretary of the Navy. You see what I mean? He went around channels. Didn't even bother his immediate commander. Didn't even bother include him in this. He went around him. But by his subordinate. One can only imagine his indignation that an order of such magnitude was issued without his knowledge.
Mm.
But he did not countermand it. All through the month of March, Spain attempted to ready itself for what appeared to be an eventual war with the United States and simultaneously did its best to prevent it. However, on April 11th, McKinley delivered his war message to Congress. So there appeared to be a well coordinated series of machinations to circumvent the people that were trying to prevent the war and bolster the people that were hawkish for it. And it all appeared to be people that were connected to Theodore Roosevelt in some sort of military camaraderie. They were all brothers in arms. Okay. And you can see here clearly in the next section that the United States Navy had upgraded most of its warships, a whole bunch of its warships, to metal hulls, and they were still up against Spain's wooden hull fleet, and they just annihilated Spain's fleet. It was an I'm going to use the term ass kicking of epic proportions, and Spain in that moment in just a few short years, went from being a world power to a has been, just like that. Their
Can
navy
I
was
ju
wiped out.
can I jump in again? I don't know if you're going forward
Yeah.
from where we are or not, but there's something that comes up all the time. It's always mentioned. I feel like I'm expected to know it. I always forget it. I think I have a basic understanding of what it is, so I'm going to ask you to kind of tell us because you probably know more. This idea of manifest destiny. Obviously, this was Teddy
Oh
Roosevelt's
yeah.
creation, right? And would you kind of tell us what
Well,
you
it was that group of people.
Okay.
Yeah, it was that group of people. So nobody knows exactly who was behind it, but it was being printed. The Manifest Destiny ideology was being printed in newspapers initially in the Eastern United States. And it became sort of a mantra of the Theodore Roosevelt administration. So I assume by now you've got this military industrial complex that's in its infancy. It's at the beginning stages of it.
Uh,
They've
America.
the whole idea. Yeah, so the whole idea here was, and so Downs versus Bidwell, that case became a central component. That's why Teddy Roosevelt went to Philander Knox and said, "Hey, I need you to intervene on this case because I want to keep the exclusive power applicable wherever I can. Because if we get attacked, on the mainland United States, I don't want to have to be begging the states to send warships or whatever into the navigable waters and streams. And this is where the water issue becomes an issue. We've talked about this before in one of our previous videos, in which the United States military took on a dominant position on the nation's waterways at the Civil War. And you saw that clearly in Gilman versus Philadelphia, and where they applied this something that had never been seen before. I've never seen it in any case law prior to the Gilman case, and that was navigational servitude.
So
And
I'm seeing this
this
as a more of an imperialistic, a groundswell of
right,
imperialism.
yes,
Where Teddy had these grand plans and he was going to make America great again, if you will, or make America great by, maybe it was like did Ronald Reagan talk about the beacon of he was talking about America too, I think, like that, talking about like the beacon of hope to all nations or whatever, like we were told. All of these things were to generate or mass support for a military supremacy in in maybe furthering or growing this idea of eventual imperialism. Is that am I assuming that right?
spot on. Because one of the issues, as soon as McKinley declared war, there was a whole bunch of states and their media apparatuses in the states. There was this is what it's called, the charge against McKinley, and it was colonialism. Right, what the United States didn't want and still doesn't want, it's never really wanted, was the territorial power to act as another English colonial force. And a lot of people say, and including the people that bolster the 1871 situation, is they say, well, if it's colonial, if the United States is acting in a colonial manner, then it must be England. You have to understand something. If colonialism was in the English blood, then it migrated to America when we came here.
Hmm.
We're no different because we're English as well. We're from that same stock.
Hmm.
So colonialism is sort of in our DNA, right? We don't need England. We don't need to have a theory
More than
in
maybe
which England
realize.
is in control of the United States for the right. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's just ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
So this whole idea of we're under English rule. It's like one thing the English would never do with the United States right now is piss us off.
Hmm.
That would be a bad idea. And they know it. Okay, so don't get it twisted. United States is every bit the colonial genetic, the genetic makeup of colonialism as England was, right? Because we're the same stock for the most part. Okay, so you've got this disaster that was created with the sinking of the Maine, and the hell with Spain, and you have all these different personalities involved, and then you got some chicanery going on in the executive branch with the assassination of the vice president, and then the assassination of the president, and then the gaining of the presidency by a guy who never had to run for office. to get it. Okay, now think that through. Teddy Roosevelt won the office of the presidency without having to campaign for it. That's just crazy. That's crazy, man.
It might just be that he was chosen to be president, huh? Appointed.
What are the odds that both the vice president and the president are going to get assassinated, and a military guy who possibly what it looks like in our historical documentation may have started a war with Spain, and there's just too many coincidences here. Okay, too
So
many.
I have to go back. I got to go back to Spain. I'm sorry. Because I don't want to detract or anything, but I'm feeling like if I got a question
Sure.
to ask, then somebody else is probably thinking it too. So we have America. I might expose my ignorance, but that's okay. As long as we can all learn from it, that's all good. So we have this nation, right? We started with the 13 colonies. We've got westward expansion. We've got this military, which I'm hoping you're going to go into on U.S. soil, and the interesting part of the Ohio Territory, the territorial government, I think, which is huge. Um, but um, but gosh, I hope I don't forget what I'm talking about. I could do
I
that.
hope you don't either.
Yeah, oh my gosh, it's starting to happen more frequent. Somebody said it's because
Oh
I'm old.
no.
I just tell everybody it's because I had a stroke. Anyway, we were talking about something important, and I can't remember what it is. So, if you could maybe just go into this idea that we talked about it before in a past video where, we talk about, well, the military isn't supposed to, we're not supposed to have long-standing militaries and we're not supposed to have all this. Well, we already had a military on U.S. soil that
Yep.
that was related to the territorial
Yep.
government, right?
Yep.
But will you tell us about this Ohio thing and why it did not get admitted into the Union? I just love that story.
Yeah. So real quick, you asked me earlier about the manifest destiny, and I didn't fully flesh it out. But one more comment on that, and then I'll jump into the Ohio situation. So the manifest destiny became the mantra of the McKinley or yeah, the McKinley administration, but definitely the Teddy Roosevelt administration. And it came up in the Bidwell case. But the way that it came up in the Bidwell case was this. One of the judges in the dissenting opinion said, "We are being told by the Department of Justice that um, we are to be a world power." That's what was being said, and it wasn't a question, and it wasn't, well, we're going to try to do this. It wasn't nothing like that. So it was like, no, this is what's happening. That's how they presented it. This is going to happen, and you're gonna put your stamp of approval on it, or face the consequences. That's kind of the tenor in which it's written. Now, it doesn't say that, but you know, when you start reading that opinion and you start reading some of the things that the judges were saying, you get the idea pretty quickly that this wasn't this wasn't a choice. There was no choice there. Manifest destiny was um, forced colonialism. Okay, so now you've got this you've got this military machine suddenly that appears out of nowhere. No, it had been holed up in Ohio pre and post Civil War. Now, when Arthur St. Clair took over Ohio in 1787, 2 years prior to the Constitution's adoption, the very first thing he did is carved out Losantiville and Fort Washington, and then he had troops. He's calling in troops and building troops and amassing a war machine. Now, it's not no 1 million man strong war machine. He knew that what they were doing were police actions, right? There's multitudes of different types of
And
war
there it is,
scenarios, but we
everybody.
know in the United yeah, but we know in the United States, like for example in Vietnam, everybody calls it a police action. Well, they're calling it that because they don't want to use the term territorial, or they don't want to use the term uh, territorial government, or anything like that, right? These are terms that are they've learned over time not popular, right? Because not only is it not popular, but they can't really let you know what they've been doing fully. Because look, um, there's two ways to do things for government. They can do it overtly or covertly. and all governments engage in both of those. Right now, if you want to be a dominant force, you can't do everything overtly. You got to do it covertly. Why? Because just think about yourself for just a minute. Just go down to the micro. Take it from the macro, go down to the micro. Just you. And you're trying to start, let's say you're Tom Munns and you want to section out your property. But the people around you are going, I don't want you to section out your property and sell it to people, build another house back there. And so now you got opposition from the people immediately surrounding you. Right? So now think about that at a macro scale. Not everybody's going to agree with what you're doing, and they know that. And it could be politically damaging, so they just make it all covert. Right? So
Yep.
the whole manifest destiny operation, and it was an operation. Don't get it screwed up. It was an operation. And the whole idea of the operation was to turn the United States into a military power.
There
Why?
you go. Mm.
Why? That's a little more confusing. One of the reasons why is the most plain reason, which is that the United States had already been doing it. They were already fully functioning military and had been on American soil for some time. They had all the assets, hardware, and the go ahead and the structure in place in 1787 to carry it out. So when they went to talk to the United States Supreme Court in the Downstairs Bidwell case, they're like, look, you can't stop us. Okay. We've been doing this since the beginning of the program and we're not going to stop. Okay. So you just need to know that. And that's how the Bidwell case really reads. And that's why the Supreme Court said, well, that what you've been doing has been practiced by you for so long, we don't feel like we could stop it if we wanted to. It's kind of that's not exactly what one of the justices said, but it's almost verbatim what was said in the case, in the written opinion. So that explains the manifest destiny situation, and it was a natural consequence of an extended timeline of territorial military dominance.
Mhm.
Okay, it was inevitable. Let's just call it that. Okay, just think it through. 1787 to 1901. How much time is that? It's over 100 years,
Mhm. Well, it would naturally be
right? It's
that it
over
would,
100 years.
yeah, it would naturally, yeah,
And you've been exercising this thing for over
for sure.
100 years.
Yeah.
And you got the War of 1812 sort of in the middle there, in which we were invaded by England and we had to repel that invasion. And they used the territorial military for that. And then afterwards, they added more. So every time we got invaded by England, we had to add more on the ground troops at the ready because we were being invaded. And it was justifiable, you see. It was justifiable. The people of the United States were like, these SOBs are driving in from Canada all the way to Philadelphia. Nobody stopped them until they hit Philadelphia. And then they burned the Library of Congress and went back. I mean, doesn't that sound strange to you?
Yeah.
Sounded strange to me. You drive all the way to Philadelphia, burn the Library of Congress, and then you leave. It's like, why? So,
So, so if you have, so the other thing too,
go.
and I don't know if we covered this or not, but Ohio was kind of interesting to me, because it wasn't the last state to join the Union. It was it was delayed in its entrance into the Union, right? We were talking. I think we talked about that before.
Yeah.
You wrote about that, and
Yes.
so Ron, tell us why that is.
Well, okay. So what's funny is it was in I think 1850 something, in which the Ohio legislature petitioned Congress for admission into the Union. And Congress had a lot of support for it, and they were almost on the verge of doing it. And then suddenly it just got dropped. There's very little explanation to that, which I found odd. I'm like, okay, well, why wouldn't you admit they were one of the first territories established? Why would you deny them admission into the Union?
Right.
And then so I'm looking, I'm reading everything, I'm reading the Northwest Ordinance, and it suddenly occurred to me, I'm like, well, wait a minute. Arthur St. Clair was head of the of the national territorial government, which is fleshed out in the Bidwell case. Two national governments, one under the Constitution, one outside of it. It's clearly stated there. They didn't they didn't pull any punches. They told you this is what we had, and they were right. And so you had this national territorial government, and its job was to make sure that all of the territories were organized and that they were getting their appropriate tutorship to become members of the union, so that when they applied for admission into the union, it would be a no-brainer that they know how to operate a representative style of government, and that they were operating their territories efficiently. I mean, because just think of the territorial program as a training ground to learn how to operate our system of government, because that's really what it was,
Mhm.
you know. And Ohio was ground zero. It was the epicenter. And so the more I looked into it, the more I realized, well, wait a minute. There were, by the time that Ohio was pushing for statehood and it was being considered in Congress, there was still Oklahoma and a few other territories underneath of its umbrella that had to be organized and then admitted into the Union before the legislation that created the Northwest Ordinance was finished. So, in order for that legislation to be done and finished, all of the territories underneath its umbrella had to be admitted into the Union, and then that would end the program. Until then, it's still a legislative program. And until that legislative program runs its course, Ohio must remain territorial because it's the seat of the territorial government
And control of the military, right?
and control of the territorial military on American soil.
Yeah. Yeah, we can't get rid of that.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
So,
I don't know why I
yeah.
like
And
that story
so,
so much, but oh, it's so
well,
revealing to me.
it's not explained. There's nobody in history that explains it. And it's clear to me and in a few other people who have really deep on this issue, it's clear that there is no other reason to deny Ohio admission into the Union. None. It's the only reason that makes any legal sense.
Well, and I think you said it
Okay.
best here. You said, as the third most populous state in the Union, Ohio played a key role in the war, and it produced a staggering 320,000 troops for its Union Army. That is what Roosevelt had control over when he ascended into office. Is it any
Yeah.
wonder? Yeah, it's perfect.
So now you've got this machine that's building itself inside the United States as a consequence of over 100 years of territorial military dominance. What do
So
you think its next move is going to be?
I should
Go ahead.
probably not say that I remembered what I forgot, because I think we're a little bit past its relevance, but I think I'm going to ask it anyway. If you say it's irrelevant, we'll just move on. So at some point when we look at the map of our country early on, and we find out that the French had occupation over the land, we also had the Spanish, right? Didn't the Spanish have a certain percentage of the land too?
Yeah, Spain was in control of Florida and they sold Florida to us.
So
Yeah.
if that's true, is there a connection to be made between why the US had some sort of animosity with Spain? What was I'm just still trying to figure out, it's still looming in my mind. Why was Spain just the chosen
Spain had control.
bastard
Here's the
child?
reason. No, Spain had control of the insular areas that we now control, and we needed those insular areas as outposts for our military so that we could create a dominant navy.
So let's tell people what insular is again. Those are non-contiguous, right?
That's right. I mean,
Territories that
the
were
term insular
acquired,
means separate from.
right? Acquired by us. Okay, good. That's good.
Separate from, yeah.
Okay.
So we needed those areas for military bases so that we could
God.
expand our navy into the territorial seas.
Let's go invade foreign countries. It's what we've always done.
Right. Right. You
Oh
see it
my
very early on.
gosh.
This was the plan
Oh my
because they
gosh.
went into the Bidwell case and they said, we are going to be a world power. Well, how the hell are you going to be a world power unless you control the territorial seas? And the
Yeah.
United States Constitution gave us the authority, the constitutional authority, to have a standing navy.
Yep. They did clearly.
Say,
Yep.
yeah,
And it was
and they didn't
because
give
it.
us any restrictions on where it would operate.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So you go into, let's see, you talked about unauthorized command attacking the Spanish fleet in the Philippines. I'm just bringing these up as tidbits. A couple of notes I wrote. War with Spain, uh, McKinley's message to Congress, Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders. Apparently, he
I
wanted to
need to make a
be.
correction. I did say that the vice president was assassinated, but he died of a heart attack. I don't know that I consider that legit, right? Okay.
Mm.
It just there were two. So I'm saying that that's my opinion. In the
You can't
book, I
mean that.
write exactly how. Yeah.
You can't
So
even insinuate that the government has actually gone, tried to be able to exterminate any opposition that its way, could you?
yeah. Well, when I wrote the book, I made sure to stay true to the historical record. I think the guy was assassinated. That's
I'm
my
the conspiracy.
opinion.
I'm the conspiracy head. It's just my job to throw a wrench in the whole thing,
Yeah, there was just too many things that are just they lined up so perfectly. And look, it could have been completely 100% legit and natural, and maybe there are just divine forces out there that are sort of playing a game. Who knows? Nobody really knows. All I know is that for all of this stuff to line up the way that it did would take more than just luck. Okay, so
So you were
but
talking about.
interestingly enough,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
No, I was just following. I was
Well, I was
just
going to point
following
out
along in the
Henry
book.
Cabot Lodge. Look at the last name Lodge. Does anybody recognize that last name in the state of Idaho?
Yes, she was my senator,
You just
and he was my
yeah, you just kind
judge.
of wonder whenever I see names associated with some of this territorial history, and these people are from Ohio, which was a center for the territorial government, right? So if there's anything that is, if there's any state in the United States that has a very dominant territorial background, it's the state of Ohio. Okay. And the lodges, this family here, come from Ohio. And it makes me wonder if the lodges that we have also
Came
hail
from
from that
Ohio.
state.
Wouldn't that be
Yeah.
crazy? Man, that would be great.
Wouldn't
I
it
mean,
though?
the mindset's kind of the same. I mean, it
Right.
would seem to me, right?
Right. So Henry Cabot Lodge, the lodges have been a prominent family in Ohio, and others urged uh, Teddy Roosevelt, I think I'm talking about here, to run for vice president in 1900. Roosevelt was reluctant to take the powerless position and issued a public statement saying that he would not accept the nomination. Roosevelt wanted the presidency and he considered any other position a powerless appointment. That was the issue with Roosevelt, is he wanted power. Now, if you just wanted to serve, why would you go into government wanting power? Well, in order to get your agenda done, you have to have power. And if the agenda was to create a military industrial complex and a dominant world and become a dominant world power, you've got to have power to effectuate that. That means he's aiming for the presidency. So what are they willing? What would him and his group be willing to do to get to the presidency? I don't know. You tell me.
That's unreal.
You tell me.
Yeah, excellent. So you go
All this
into
comes from a
go ahead.
life Theodore Roosevelt, A Life by Miller Nathan in 1992. It's a good book. It's a real good book. I quote that directly out of his book.
So
But
you
you
go
can see,
through.
like right here, I got in quotation marks. These are some of the shenanigans that were going on. This is the Republican Party. Okay,
Can you say that one more
these are
time?
all Republicans here.
Republicans, right?
Republicans. Additionally, Roosevelt was informed by President McKinley and campaign manager Mark Hanna that he was not being considered for the role of vice president due to his actions prior to the Spanish American War. He pissed off the wrong people because he went around the executive command structure to do what he did. So think it through. Do you really think Garrett Hobart's had a legitimate heart attack. Okay. Roosevelt attended the 1900 Republican National Convention, no doubt in defiance, as a state delegate and struck a bargain with Platt. Roosevelt would accept the nomination if the convention offered it to him, but would otherwise serve another term as governor. Platt asked Pennsylvania party boss Matthew Quay to lead the campaign for Roosevelt's nomination, and Quay outmaneuvered Hanna at the convention to put Roosevelt on the ticket. Roosevelt won the nomination unanimously.
Gosh. I'm just saying that's familiar. That's familiar.
Now, when I said he won the presidency without campaigning for it, I didn't say anything about the vice presidency.
Mhm.
The presidency. He won the presidency without running campaigning for the presidency.
Wow. So you talk a little bit about the Treaty of Paris. Can you kind of tell us what you know about that and how it relates to Teddy?
Well, there's been quite a few treaties of Paris. I'm sure that the next treaty with Spain would culminate in a Treaty of Paris. Um, and it was just a cessation of hostilities between the United States and Spain. And Spain agreed to turn over the insular areas that it was in control of, which is Puerto Rico. I think Cuba was in there. Some of those islands around that area. I think the Virgin Islands might have came later. I don't remember right now. But so we got some of these insular areas, and right away, that's where the military reports come from. So in these videos, I've been reading or talking to people out of the military reports because they were generated from this situation, right?
Mhm.
So that's the importance of those military reports. You want to know what's going through the minds of the military guys that are in charge of Puerto Rico, and it's when we had military occupation there at the end of the Spanish American War, and that's when you get some of this stuff that goes in the book. It's like, wow, man, wow. And the Dallas versus Bidwell decision had already been made before that report had gotten to um, the Secretary of War, who was the one that ordered the creation of that report. And the Bidwell decision had come out, and it didn't go the way they had hoped. The administration. So there must have been some kind of order against this guy that was putting the report together. There must have been some sort of order to keep out certain parts of that opinion because the opinion is mentioned in the military reports, but not in the manner in which see that the doctrine, the Supreme Court's creation of the doctrine really was a problem for the administration.
You said in
It
your
didn't go the way that they thought it would.
you said something interesting here. The passage of the treaty was seen by the McKinley administration as the consent of the governed. Now, a lot of us are familiar with the consent of the governed. And then subsequently, right on cue, McKinley sent troops to quell a nationalist insurgency that broke out in the Philippines shortly after the war ended. So it looks like
Yeah.
they were concerned that a portion of the treaty was going to return perhaps some power to the people.
Well, we had just chased Spain out of the Philippines and Puerto Rico, etc. And of course, a nationalist insurgency of Philippines that just want to control their own islands themselves and not American dominance over them rose up, and then they had to put it down. So it's just nationalism. It's the same thing the United States is going through now. When you're under occupation, nationalism is a direct consequence of being under occupation, and we've been under military-industrial complex occupation since forever
Yeah.
in the United States, especially in the Western United States. It's been more pronounced in the Western United States than in the Eastern United States. That's why you get that's why you get all these things that happen in the West. I mean, you're not going to see. Here's what you're not going to see. You're not going to see um, sagebrush rebellions in the Eastern United States. You're not going to see another Ammon Bundy in the Eastern United States. You're not going to see a Ruby Ridge. Why? Because the policy, the government's ownership of land in the West, it's a total of 647 million acres of land, all of its entire stockpile. But domestically, it's a small continent in the Western United States, and you're going to get conflicts because of the manner in which their policies impinge upon state power. Okay. Federal policies, their dominating exclusive jurisdiction policies, impinge on and erode state power. So you're going to
Right.
get conflicts. That's why
Sure.
we have so many conflicts in the Western United States. But when this stuff is framed in the national media, this never comes up, ever. They steer clear of this subject.
Well, then it's our job to be able to bring it to light.
That's right. So
So,
there's a
well, so I have
huge
another question then.
difference.
So you go
Yeah,
into,
go ahead. Go ahead.
forgive me if, well, you go into at the bottom of this thing, it talks about the open door policy McKinley had in supporting the commercial interest in China. No, this kind of stuff has been going on forever. Now we all support China. Clinton and all that arguably gave China all of our secrets and whatever. So we've got this, nobody recognizes the fact that, China today is a communist country, and and China has most of the seats in the UN Human Rights Council, which is the irony to beat all ironies. But something
Right.
traditional to the United States that we see today is what you wrote in here, where McKinley looks like they were pursuing an open door policy with American interest in China, like they're doing today. And yet there was a Boxer Rebellion, which was a national uprising against the foreign intervention in China against McKinley, right? Is that right?
um yeah, so the best way to view this problem is to view it actually a little bit later on through the FDR administration, or just before. So the transition team, where we had Richard Moyle and the rest of the transition team, that was the brain trust. And Richard Moyle wrote a book called After 7 Years. And it's an excellent book, and it's about his time in the administration, what he saw. And basically, Richard Moyle states this. He says, when he went into the administration, the previous administration was populated by industrialists. We would call them globalists now.
Hmm.
They were calling them industrialists at the time, and they were industrialists everywhere. American industrialists who were overseas extracting resources, whether they were there legally or on an invite, or they were just forcefully doing it. That's not the point here. Most of it was forceful and not really. It's a mixed bag. But anyway, these industrialists were already overseas, and they were in the administration trying to get the administration to protect their endeavors, utilizing the United States military and political might. And so the open door policy was that foreign nations that require the help of the United States in any way, shape, or form had to pay up, and they had to open their doors to let industrialists from the United States go into their countries and industrialize them, mining, textiles, whatever. That was the deal.
So if it was typical today, the industrialists would go in, and they would end up controlling those areas. So if they were going to go in and mine somewhere, they would end up
That's
taking control of that area, right?
Yeah, that's the thing about globalists. Once you let them in the door and it becomes all about money making, regardless of how it starts, it always ends up the same.
Right.
Always.
So you had
And we can see that clearly, like the whole history of the world. Well, since let's just go since 1900, since 1901, the United States has been on an empire building mission since 1901. It's clearly right here on black and white and paper. The history supports it. We were going to be a world power, and this is this Teddy Roosevelt setting the stage and laying the foundation for what has become what we are now.
Yeah. Wow. So you go into talking about, so we talked about imperialism, obviously anti-imperialism, uh, referring to Downs v. Bidwell, Manifest Destiny, imperialism. And then on page 63, you go into and you mention the DOJ. I can't remember if this is the first mention of them, but I found it really interesting because I think of DOJ as like, you know, something, it's obviously a federal agency, but it's a new federal agency. And I think most people today that would see it would say, oh, yeah, that's just an abusive agency. So I don't know, was that the, I don't know if that's the first time you mentioned it, but, but I don't recall reading about when it was created or why it was created, whether it was legitimately
The
created.
Department of Justice.
Yeah. If it had a legitimate purpose and what it was doing during this time when it was talking about the Theodore Roosevelt clearly favored the court's imperialist decision in Downs versus Bidwell. You talk about, in other words, you talk about the GOJ quite a bit throughout your book. And so I want people to have
Yeah.
a
So
rather firm grasp of what they're doing there, why they're there, and what, kind of what they're doing.
so let's talk about the creation of the DOJ for a moment. The DOJ became, well, I guess you would say, somewhat necessary from the Civil War on. It became something that just everybody saw as necessary. But let's bring this up.
Sorry
Um,
to deviate. I just though this is reminding me of some of the questions I had when I was reading this thing a couple of times.
but the actual creation of the Attorney General of the United States came in 1789, right? It's the Judiciary Act, and we cover a little bit about the Judiciary Act when we talked about the Propeller Genesee Chief case and Waters, right? So there was a issue, the litigation, ongoing litigation between the states and the federal government over waters and who had authority and proprietary use and ownership of the waters within the boundaries of the state. So the United States government thought that it could apply its commercial power to the waters. The Supreme Court of the United States says, well, then you got a problem because in your act in which you gave admiralty jurisdiction to the courts in the 1789 Judiciary Act, you failed to mention that. And because you failed to mention that, we see no intention for you to do that, so we're not going to let you do it. So if you're gonna do something, you have to pass legislation. There's been an ongoing problem between the federal court and the legislative department of Congress. Congress just wants to do like it did in the creation of the vassal state program and just fly by the seat of their pants, do whatever they want with no authority, no legislation, just whatever, just winging it. That's what they want to do. And the Supreme Court has constantly over the years said to the United States government, the most powerful legislative branch maybe on the planet, and said, look, you can't keep doing this. Okay? Pass some legislation that says exactly what it is that you want to do, and we'll go along with it. But until then, no. Okay? So it's been an ongoing problem. So anyway, the Attorney General's office was set up in 1789, but it expanded in 1870 out of the necessity of dealing with a whole bunch of litigation that came after the Civil War, right? Because remember, we were talking about this before. You got a whole reconstruction that needs to take place because we're moving from a dual federal model
Mhm.
to eventually a cooperative federal model where the United States government was going to be a dominating force over and upon the states and the citizens. And you see this clearly in all the case law from the the slaughterhouse cases, and they're trying to figure out how to adopt the 14th Amendment in their precedent, where they got to go, oh, so we got another class of citizen and we have to accommodate our case law to have different rights for another class of citizen. Or like, we're not going to do that because the Constitution, the comedy clause of the Constitution demands that everything be uniform. So we can't do that. So, I think Congress has had a difficult time learning to master the system of government that we have properly without trying machinations and little schemes and stuff to try to get around the restriction because they want to get something done. Maybe it's a moneymaker, maybe it's a favor for a friend or whatever, and they're trying to get something done. The Constitution doesn't allow them to do it, and so they just find a way to circumvent it. So anyway, the attorney general's position was expanded into the Department of Justice in the 1870s to accommodate all that stuff, right? So then an issue arises like, okay, well, what exactly is the authority of the Department of Justice? Well, they have a very limited authority. Their authority can only be wherever the United States government has an exclusive power. It can only be that, because otherwise you might as well just rip the 10th Amendment power from the states and rip private rights from the individual and just give the United States government a dominating legal social position over everyone else in the system. I mean, that's
Right.
what you might as well do. But if we're going to have a demarcation between state power and citizens' rights, then then it's where there's a lot of case law on this, that the United States government only really has authority where it can where it has some level of exclusive power. So we can. So one of the things you'll notice in a lot of the case laws, the United States government will say, well, for example, it's a Commerce Clause issue. They'll say, in this scenario, we have an exclusive power. Well, the Supreme Court of the United States will go through it and figure out, okay, let's look at our precedent and how we've ruled on this before, and we want to find out, does the state have an option here? Does the citizen have an option here? And if the state doesn't have an option here, an option to apply its 10th Amendment power, and the citizen doesn't have an option to apply a private right restriction, then the federal government can use that power exclusively. And so, therefore, the Department of Justice would have authority to intervene. But what the Department of Justice likes to do is intervene in things where it clearly doesn't have authority and power. And
Okay.
it's accepted by everybody because you go talk to an attorney and they'll all tell you the same shit. I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to
It's
cuss.
okay.
Same
Shame on you.
stuff.
So we are
Man,
at an
I gotta
hour,
clean that up.
um, and we're in a bit of a crisis, sort of. And that is that we have one last page, 64, before we hit chapter 8. The question is, do we stop now because it's an hour, or do we cover whatever's left in this last page and then end the video? Uh,
um,
you talked about
your
so in
call.
other words,
What do you want
so
to do?
you wrote about Philander Knox. You talked about him already, appointed by McKinley. He was a yes man. If there's anything significant about that, you need to mention the fact that Teddy and Knox were both Republicans, neocons.
Well,
Uh,
there's a lot of fodder there, right? Because there's just give me a few more minutes. There's a lot of fodder here, right? Because that's the thing about Philander Knox keeping his position. Like if you've got a group, a military brotherhood that has told the United States Supreme Court that we're going to be a world power. So you kind of know what you're dealing with now. Right? You should know. Like anybody with a brain can look at this situation and go, okay, I think we're dealing with colonialists. You can call them that. You can call them just power mad. You can call them, but these are Republicans, and this is your neocon rhino faction. They're all the same. It's a personality trait. And remember, we've
Warmongers.
talked about this. Yeah, we've talked about this repeatedly in these videos, Tom. I've told you that
Yeah,
this Republican faction
yeah.
were the Hamiltonian Federalists.
Would they have
And
been
that's
better served to?
significant to understand and know.
Would they have had a better? Were they better served to have Hamilton's bust or Lincoln's? Do you suppose? Because right, the
What do you mean? What?
Republicans are the Republicans are known as the party of
Oh,
Lincoln. Should they have been better served as the party
well,
of Lincoln or the party of Hamilton?
Hamilton, hands
That's
down.
that's what I thought too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they are not the party of Abraham Lincoln. I guarantee you that right now. They are the party of Alexander Hamilton. Okay, let's
yeah.
get that straight.
So let's see. You talk about, and actually, we pretty much summarized all of that. You mentioned postmodern neo-Marxism. Let's see. You find imperial manifest destiny, military dominance, same thing as today, right? We're going to spread
Same thing as
democracy
today,
and all that, right? I'm sure they probably said that too.
whether
First,
you
we
like it or not.
first we saw federalism become the dominant ideology, and there was the manifest destiny, imperialistic ideology, and then there was a counter ideology self-titled the ambitious national program. Can you clarify that for the viewers, bud? The
Which
ambitious
page are you
national
on here?
well, in the book that I have, it was 64. Ambitious national program. Now, I would have now reading the book this far, I would have said
Oh,
the ambitious national program would have gone
yeah.
back to the formation of the well, maybe not. No,
You know where
it
I got that?
no, it went back to ownership versus disposal.
You know where I got this?
Where
I got this from the Congressional Record in 1929.
wow,
This was in the Congressional Record.
nice.
And on the record, the Democrats stated on the record that they were going to be employing a national ambitious or an ambitious national program, exactly like it says here, ambitious national program. And so from 1929 onward, that's what they did. So
So
the
what is that
FDR
program?
administration, well, look at the FDR administration.
Oh, so
What they
expense
did,
major expansion of the
yeah,
administrative state.
yep. Here's what, and so here's, I pieced this together and I hope I'm right in it, but it's taken a lot of years to come to this. And I'm going to tell you what I think. I think that what the Democrats had figured out, if they wanted to have control in Congress more than what they had at the close of the Civil War, then what they needed to do is they needed to attach themselves to this other national government that had been operating, that they knew existed. And they probably got together and said, well, how do we seize control of that away from the Republicans? Well, they weren't able to do it fully, but what they were able to do is they were able to create administrative agencies that they could control.
Which
That's
is
what
in
the whole
essence
FDR.
in essence the congressional form of government versus the constitutional government, right?
Right,
Or
right.
yeah, right.
So
Okay.
so it, so
Just
yeah,
wanted to make
so
sure.
so they created these social programs under these agencies that they could control. And that's been so the Republicans already had the military industrial complex. They still have it. They're very extreme. These people are very powerful. The Republicans in Congress, even though they're not very numerous, there is not one single Democrat that would ever speak ill of, like, the Mike Rogers and those guys, because they'd wake up with a horse head in their bed, sort of thing, right? It's just not a good idea. So they said, well, how do we, in order for us to compete with the Republicans, we're going to have our own section of the administrative state that we control. That's all your social programs and environmental programs. All the military administrative agencies are all controlled by the Republicans.
And now they're both supporting the same stuff.
Well, what they've done is they've realized, oh, hey, we got a sweet gig going here. You guys in your administrative agencies and us in our administrative agencies, we can have a dominating control of the United States faction that we all think is problematic, which is the conservatives, and you guys use your apparatus and we'll use our apparatus and we'll keep them under control, and neither one of us will ever have to contend with them.
And thus the uniparty, ladies and gentlemen.
That's right.
Two parties working together. Yes, sir.
That's right.
That was greatly done, man. That was
Oh, thank
greatly
you, thank
done.
you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll be here till Thursday. Um, cool. Well, it looks
Be
like
sure and tip your waitress.
at least I think we killed it. We ended
I
at
think we killed
the
it.
end of chapter 7, and our next video, if we decide to do a book video, will be starting on chapter 8. So,
Perfect.
do you have any final comments before we terminate this episode?
No, I'd like to say, Tom, you're beautiful. Thank you for all your time and effort and work on this stuff, and I'm looking forward to having some interviews with people who've been abused by the administrative state, and really, I would love to have people from the administrative state come on here and explain their side of everything, and let's get to the bottom of it. Let's talk it out. Let's figure out if there is a way that the conservative class can function in this system without being targeted by both sides. So
Yeah, amen to that. Yeah. Well, you're beautiful, man. This is so
you're
this
beautiful,
is
babe.
so this is so fun. I just can't believe we're doing this. We've done 16, 18, 20 videos already. It's still going good. I'm hoping that people are learning stuff. I know Michael Law is, or I mean, he's at least interacting, and that's a great thing. We've
He
had
is
a couple.
interacting, and we've had some great conversations back and forth in the questions and answers and stuff like that. So I would really look forward to a roundtable, which he says, yeah, let's do a roundtable. And so now that I got decent audio and decent video, I think
Yeah,
let's do that.
you sound great. Look great, sound
Do
great.
I look
You got a
good?
great background.
Tell me I
Yeah.
look good.
You need to pick you look good. I have a wave like that where I'm actually in it, eating it. So I
Oh
think maybe
no
I should
way!
just, oh yeah, I do.
Oh dude, yeah, I gotta make one. Yeah.
Anyway, well, God bless you, my friend, and God
God
bless
bless,
all our
brother.
viewers, man, and just stay safe and keep studying, become educated, become an active force for the restoration of our republic. Don't ever admit to yourself that nothing can ever be done, because that would only neuter your spirit and your mind and those around you. So stay strong, stay vigilant, and until next time, Ron, man, I appreciate it. For anybody that's interested, Ron Nielsen, author of The History of Federal Lands in the United States, The History of Federal Lands in the United States.com. Buy a copy of the book, support the author. Look, man, if you got the money, support the author. He's doing some great work. He's doing something that nobody else is doing, right? So if you are an individualist rather than a collectivist, you would want to be more interested in something that not everybody's focusing on. And that's why I feel like I'm special. So anyway, take care, and we'll talk to you guys next time.
Bye, everybody.